Lily, hi, welcome to the Female Startup Club podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy for us to be here too. It's been a long time in the works. I'm excited to learn more about your business, what you're up to, what's going on in your world. Where do you like to kind of kick off your story with one small step?
Where do I like to kick it off? Wow. I don't know. It's a long story. It's sort of my life's work. For those that aren't familiar with it, I run One Small Step. It's a climate technology startup and started it out of Australia, and it's a mobile application. So it helps you reduce your carbon emissions through lifestyle changes, and it uses behavioural science to make it easy for you to adopt kind of green behaviours that really work for you and your lifestyle. And I've been running it since 2018. I'm a sole founder, and we launched it into the United States also at the start of this year.
Oh my gosh, so cool. So interesting. You said that it's been your life's work. Do you want to kind of rewind, take us back to what you were doing before you started the business and what got you thinking about this idea in particular and that light bulb moment that happened to you?
I wanted to work in social impact or social justice ever since I was quite sort of young. My family, I think the kinds of conversations we had around the dinner table, my mum worked in mental health care and my dad was a journalist but was very big on press freedom and, public broadcasting. So they were both sort of activists in their own right. And I was raised in a family where the value set was, you want to do good work, but also how are you going to contribute to society? And that was just something that I was raised in. And so that was a big frame of reference for me in thinking about what I wanted to do through university. And I studied law, which I decided I think now is a mistake for me at least. I did a whole 5-year arts law degree. And law is fantastic because it teaches you how to think and process lots of information, bless you, quickly. But the downside, at least at that point when I was studying, is that you had to work in corporate law to get really good. There wasn't a lot happening in Australia in terms of really good public interest litigation compared to some of the firms overseas. So I early on in university realised that I wanted to work in the environmental movement because I saw climate change as a really significant social justice issue because it has such inequitable impacts, both generationally and then for people that are the least responsible for having caused the damage are the ones that are most affected by it. And it also is just like a maximizer for human suffering and all kinds of human security threats that we want to avoid. So I felt like working on climate change was a really good use of my time and energy, highly intellectually challenging, very complex, lots and lots of different areas you could contribute to. So I started down that path, but really struggled with like how to apply my legal background effectively. And so ended up moving into campaigning, so political campaigning, looking at top-down reforms at the federal level. I worked for an advocacy organisation called Get Up when I was in university fairly early on as a sort of junior campaigner, and then had worked in Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, which is a part of the public service, to sort of learn how the sausage gets made in government. And that was very formative over 2 years. And then went back into campaigning on climate for Get Up, was working on renewable energy specifically and coal seam gas. And running those campaigns, I really got a sense of how significant an impact we can have when we mobilise people in sort of their thousands to make changes to their consumer choices and also changes to their behaviour. We sort of ran the numbers on some of the campaigns that I was responsible for. One where we were getting people to switch to an electricity provider that was only generating renewable energy through their generation side of the business and was offsetting everybody's emissions through their electricity, getting people to switch to green power, another scheme. And the impact was really significant with sort of 15,000 people in one campaign, 5,000 in another. Took them a couple of minutes online to switch. So these were sort of fairly easy actions, and yet the impact was really significant, not only in terms of the emission reductions, but also the fact that it was growing the market share of environmentally friendly businesses, growing their market power. So you're kind of pushing against the fossil fuel energy incumbents with a really actually quite a positive campaign. So that was sort of my light bulb moment, going, okay, there's an underutilized sort of area of effort we could be looking at in the environmental movement, and that's really looking at people power and consumer movements. There's been a really big focus on top-down political reform and how essential that is. It doesn't take away the fact that it's still essential, but that I think people fundamentally misunderstand how we change dynamic systems like our society, how we decarbonize society, and we really do need grassroots change at all levels of society in order to be successful. And the IPCC report, the latest one that's come out, has sort of shown that now, looking at, I'm going way too technical, but what's called demand-side climate change mitigation. They're like 40 to 70% of the global carbon emission reductions we need to make could potentially come from demand side. So that's changes in behaviour effectively. And one small step is dedicated to helping people make those changes in their behaviour. And I also studied a bit of economics and choice theory in my political science degree, and had been obsessed with behavioural economics and behavioural science. So was really nerding out on the potential applications of that emerging research in the product I've ultimately built. How do we effectively support people to make better decisions, working with the way that people make decisions and take action, rather than just info dumping or sort of guilt tripping. We really wanted it to be positive and something that actually supported people in growing their well-being, as well as having the environmental impact.
Wow. It sounds absolutely amazing. I love everything that you're doing. I'm so curious about this time in your life where you're having these thoughts. You studied law. You're obviously a non-technical founder from what I can tell. And you've decided to embark on becoming a tech entrepreneur and developing an app. Do you quit your job and go all in? Are you starting with a small MVP? And I should preface to everyone, I am less familiar with talking about tech and apps and all this kind of thing. So you're really going to have to step me through the blueprint of your journey like I'm a grandma.
No, it's good, because I was basically a grandma starting out, as you said, non-technical founder. So going, okay, I'm going to build, a mobile application with this sort of feature set where we can do A/B testing or multivariate testing of comms and design and user interface. Like, that was a really tough ask when it was just me at the start. I would say the first few years of trying to do this were the toughest. I didn't really know who to listen to, because I didn't have a coding background. So one option is, okay, I learned to code myself. A second is that I bring in a technical co-founder who can execute the coding and development side for the business and for me. The third was sort of raising money and hiring outsourced developers. I went with an option where I went through an accelerator program that was designed for tech-enabled businesses, sort of supporting female founders. And the intention was they'll pair you with a team of developers and they'll help you build out your MVP. And you didn't have to front up the initial capital to do that. They took an equity stake and they would build the MVP. So on the face of it, it's called She Starts through Blue Chili. On the face of it, that seemed like a good option, but I think I didn't have any experience in product management. I think I was also not great at sort of being really clear about what I knew. Like, I knew my eco-conscious consumer market really well from years of grassroots campaigning, and I knew a ton about what needed to be in the product from a behavior change standpoint. I didn't push hard enough on that because I was sort of like, well, I don't know anything about running a business. I don't know anything about building a minimum viable product. So let's do it in the way that I'm being told to do it or being suggested. And so I think there was probably, a good 18 months where we made very little headway, despite working really hard, doing some government grants, sort of bootstrapped it. I did a crowdfunding campaign where I raised $30,000 from the public, launched a local version of the app, kind of an early version in Canberra, using some white labeling. So it was really tough because I just didn't have that technical co-founder who really understood what I was trying to achieve. And that alignment is so important when you're building something that's never been built before. And for a long time, I had people often say to me, like, what you're trying to do isn't possible. No one's going to change their behavior through a mobile app. It's too hard. No one gives a crap about the environment. Your market's going to be really tiny. You get all kinds of lots of opinions, which is totally fine. I mean, if it was obvious to everybody that it was a good idea, it would already probably exist. But what changed it for me was getting in some really fantastic technical advisors, really just through loose tie contacts. I had Simon Sheik, who was the former director of GetUp where I'd worked, and now the founder of the ethical superannuation fund, Future Super. he introduced me to Brian Rollins, who was very senior in Atlassian, a senior product guy there. Atlassian's a massive software company in Australia. And we just really hit it off. Like, I remember I was like, sorry to swear, but kind of shitting myself when I first met him and talked to him on the phone, because I thought, oh, this guy's not going to be interested in what I'm doing. You know, I barely have a product. It's really just me at this point. But he was just so lovely. You know, some of the best people, I think, for me in business that I've met are highly intelligent, but just have no ego and no pretension. And they're sort of the best people to work with. And so Brian was really, really fantastic as a support. Same with Jason Serafino, another guy that came in as an advisor. He's a really experienced chief technology officer of a fintech in Australia. And I started working with those guys about mid-2019. And they really helped me to understand how to structure, you know, a lean product development business or lean product development team, helped me hire my first in-house developer and really understand what was needed, both in terms of tech stack choices and just how to manage developers as a non-technical person. And so I just got really good mentoring, basically. It was invaluable, raised some pre-seed funding with their support. And then we were sort of away. And then software was sort of neutralized as an issue, because whereas prior to that, it had been really tough just to even get a product that worked in the way that, even at the most basic level, to test the assumptions that I had. It was really tough. That was a huge turning point, getting those guys in my corner. And they're still, both of them, involved with the business to this day. And so thanks, Brian and Jason and Simon, for the initial intro. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, the technical part of getting that MVP ready and getting the first kind of versions, it just seems like such a challenge. And then you've got to, I guess, onboard users and see what they're doing when they're using the app and starting to kind of take that next phase of launch and kind of marketing. How did you go about launching into the market and getting your first kind of core users?
That part was easier because, again, the grassroots campaigning, there's a lot of similarity between digital marketing and digital campaigning. You know, I ran some live events, did sort of launches, went to little festivals, built an email list. At that point, Facebook advertising was really good. It was cheap, unlike my experience with it now. So we put a couple of $100 behind some ads. Just, I think for the crowdfunding campaign as well, we built a list that way. You know, the Facebook ads were really cheap. I think we put $200 behind them and we acquired our first 1,000 kind of signups that way.
What?
Yeah, we had a really good initial demand because I think what we were doing was novel at the time and also really strong environmental focus. It's very mission driven. It was pretty easy for us to get some press as well. So we had a few, going through the accelerator, and then because I was based in Canberra at the time, was able to use the local media a bit to kind of get the brand awareness up. Potentially too early. We didn't necessarily need that exposure at that point when we barely had a product. But that helped too. So I think that initial phase of acquiring that first 1,000 signups was easy. And then as we started to try to scale up user acquisition, which, for the mechanics of a model like my business, you really need to have accelerating user acquisition on a monthly basis if you're going to grow, because you've got a high churn product with a mobile app. Even with good retention, you basically need to have an increasing number of new users to be able to scale the user base. And that's been a big challenge for us, actually. We've found that we've got a pretty good, what's called a paid user acquisition engine. We've done that through TikTok and then Google Ads, and we're continuously testing different channels. And we were able to find a really good partner to work with that helped us on a pay for performance basis, which was great because you're not paying for the service, you're paying for the outcome. And they were an international firm.
It's critical.
That's worked pretty well, but I think where we haven't done as well actually is like in our content marketing, we haven't had a full marketing person on staff the whole time. We've got a really solid mailing list and we're sort of sending stuff out to people and we have our followings on social media, but we're sort of doing a lot through the app proper now in terms of community building. We have a bunch of community and group features and we're really focusing on supporting people to connect into their local sustainability initiatives, working in groups on the activities that are suggested in the app. All of it's highly personalized, by the way, like the types of action plans that you get for yourself in the app to reduce emissions. But yeah, it's sort of a community first strategy at the moment is how we're looking at growing, really focusing on user referrals.
For you, and like in this kind of model in general, How do you monetize, or is it not for profit?
We're a profit for purpose. So in Australia, that means we're a proprietary limited company, which is standard. We have a constitution with environmental objectives, both the sort of the objects of the business, and then as a director's duties include having to advance those objects and take them into consideration. So that's how we navigated that from a governance standpoint. We had Allen's law firm do our social enterprise constitution. So yeah, for profit, it meant that we were able to access capital from investment, sort of specifically a lot of impact investors, tech-based angel investors. That was easier initially than having to raise from philanthropic donors. It was really a hard call on whether to go non-profit or for-profit. And I think there's arguments for both, especially when you're cause-driven. But in terms of monetization, that's something we're really working quite hard on at the moment. We have a solid user base. I think the biggest achievement is that we've proven the product's effective. It actually does what it says it'll do. Probably could go a bit further in terms of being effective, but we've got users reducing their carbon emissions through the tool, which I think is a really awesome achievement given how difficult changing behavior can be. And so from a monetization standpoint, we had a subscription-based offer for a while. We took that off because we felt like we were sort of making it harder for people to access the best parts of the tool. And then we've had referral partnerships. So we do sort of like Good On You, if you're familiar with them, Ethical Consumers Australia. They're great, by the way. They rank fashion brands on their environmental and labour credentials. And so you can sort of scan a barcode at a shopping mall and see if, there's a very comprehensive amount of brand ratings there. Plus you can search on their site for sort of the best brands. But they ran a referral arrangement that I think hit a really good balance between allowing them to bring in some revenue with a free product while also not compromising their integrity. And so the way we've tried to do that is we only recommend businesses that really supporting people to reduce emissions, not just in a marginal way, but in a big way. And then also we give non-sponsored recommendations and we show the basis of our recommendations. So with third-party accreditation. And examples in like superannuation, we have a green finance program in the app. We ask people to switch their super fund if they're up for it, so they're not investing in fossil fuel projects. And there are several funds in Australia that have these screening policies where they won't invest in fossil fuels. And there's sort of third-party accreditation for that, or that Market Forces has done a really good assessment of the funds that have those kind of green portfolios. And so we recommend Verve Superannuation, who are supporting us with a referral fee. They also support a lot of projects around gender equality. We think they're a really great fund, but there's a bunch of others as well that are good. And so we recommend those as well. And that's kind of how we've looked at monetizing. We've also just launched One Small Step for Businesses. So it's sort of like a version of the app, but allows for a lot of collaboration between colleagues and then data dashboards. So you can kind of see the impact that you're all having, the carbon emissions from staff, setting up live challenges. So we just launched that in the last month.
Wow, that's really cool. And so do you go out and pitch to like the HR department of a company and try and get them onboarded? And do they pay you for that, or?
Yeah, that's the point of monetizing with it. Definitely, it's on a subscription basis.
Yeah, so you charge them to be on there. Got it.
Yeah, charge companies to use the product. At the moment, it's $2 per user per month annual, or $5 per user per month monthly. Yeah, so that's a very low price point, but we're just starting with the offer. So,
what's your when you're looking at your marketing and kind of acquisition now? What is it that shifts the needle for kind of just getting the everyday consumer and getting businesses on board?
You mean in terms of how do we get traction in acquiring new users, acquiring customers? Look, I don't think that we've sort of nailed that yet. It's something we're continuously working on. Definitely, I've found for my business that we have a surprisingly good impact in user acquisition from press coverage. I'd always sort of thought of press coverage as it's like building brand value and brand awareness, but it's not going to necessarily have an obvious and direct impact on your acquisition numbers. But that's not been the case for us. Whenever we have press coverage, what we tend to find is that we'll see a dip in our cost per user acquisition in the kind of couple of days following. So that's been a great one. And then with the enterprise piece, like offering the tool to businesses, we really have just started. So I wouldn't say that I've got a recipe for success there yet. I'm just sort of talking to people that I already have relationships with, looking at, we did a fair bit of customer discovery of the types of industries that would be interested in using this tool and the types of job titles, who are the decision makers. So it's all standard kind of enterprise SaaS business development stuff, really, and I'll see how I go.
You've recently been going through a raise. I'm wondering what your experience has been like and what you've learned going through this process that you can pass on to anyone else who is going through the journey.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that you can learn from doing capital raising. So it's a bit hard to answer that question, to be honest, because it's like, well, a lot. It really depends on what, if you're listening to this, like what your goals are. I mean, I can just speaking from personal experience of what my goals were and then interacting with the kind of capital raising ecosystem in Australia. I guess some key things are that it's good to know what stage you're at. And so you can, raising money is extremely intensive emotionally and in terms of the workload. Nick Crocker from Blackbird, who also supports the StartMate Accelerator, has some really good resources that are publicly available, I think, via StartMate's website on this. So if you're thinking about fundraising, I think some of his advice and publications online are like excellent. But really it's about, you can expect to work on this full time for months if you're doing a raise. The kind of key things that you'd want to be thinking about are like who you're targeting. So there's all these different sort of stages of investor sophistication. You have angel investors. They're often people who are really passionate about whatever you're working on, whatever problem you're trying to solve. They're kind of happy to put in a bet that's fairly high risk and are supportive of you, and that, they're great people to find early. And then you've got sort of family offices, which can be kind of the in-between point between angels and venture investors, and then institutional investors, venture investors. They typically have a more sophisticated way of assessing, deals and the suitability of your business for investment. Typically also have higher expectations, not just in terms of your traction when you're going to them to raise, but also your prospective returns. One key thing to understand about venture investment is those funds are structured so that they need to have each investment at least conceivably being able to return the full amount of the fund. So they're looking at, can you over time and fairly quickly get like over a 10x return on the investment they're making? And so it's really helpful to know your own numbers and know what you can conceivably think about. Like if you have an understanding of your revenue model, any points that you can validate, numbers that you can put in front of people where you've validated your assumptions, always going to go really well. And I would also just say, like, people are really happy to give feedback. So, you can sort of soft start and just start to build relationships with people, ask for feedback. A lot of venture funds and some family offices do office hours. You can meet with analysts and they'll give you feedback on how you're going. And that can be really helpful when you're just kind of getting a sense of the lay of the land. I remember when I did my seed round, I actually asked one investor, how should I price this round? What do you think I should do? And I had some angel investors as well. And I just sort of asked for advice and used the power of loose ties. So I didn't know anyone with money when I was starting out, but I'd been involved in the startup community in Melbourne. I was working through a great co-working space called One Roof. And so I just sort of was like, how do I meet investors? And I just started there by asking the question and talking to people that I knew and slowly getting introductions that way. The other thing that I think is really great for when you're raising money is you want to have really regular communication. So for people who are on your list, think of it like customer record management. You've got a list of people who are prospective investors. You have an initial chat. You send them through some materials, then maybe a follow-up investment deck. So you have a couple of conversations. And between those conversations, you want to be sending updates as often as weekly to your investor list saying, this is what we said we were going to do. This is what we achieved. This is what we're still working on. And you turn, that's how you build a relationship, because it's so much about relationship building. People want to feel that they can trust you. They want to feel that you do have the traction that you're saying you have. And so if you can communicate regularly, even just during that fundraising period for the 3 or 4 or 6 months or whatever, and showing that you're delivering, that has a really big impact. Sorry, that's probably, like I said, there's so much that you could talk about.
So many insights there. So great. Thank you so much. I'm curious to know, like, for you, it sounds like you're in Series A, right? You're doing a Series A round, or?
No, we're still seed. I wouldn't say that we're Series A. We're not covering our costs. So I think especially with the changes to the market lately off the back of changes to the economy, if we're doing Series A, we'd be wanting to have pretty significant monthly recurring revenue to feel that we could justify that. raise at a decent valuation.
And for what you're doing now with this seed round, what does that enable you to do? What's the next phase of One Small Step?
Launching in a couple of other countries. So, going into the UK, New Zealand, Canada, there's still I think our focus is really, we need to turn it into a viable and sustainable business financially. That's a core part of what we're doing over the next 6 months, really, because the capital raising environment isn't great at the moment, neither in Australia or the United States. So focusing on this enterprise kind of offer, One Small Step for businesses, also really investing in the community features that we've built and supporting people in tapping into local communities, because we see that as a really strong growth strategy. So there's sort of three pillars. It's sort of like growing our revenue, growing our user acquisition through this communities piece and referrals. And then the third is just engagement, like working on making the tool as good as it can be, constantly improving it based on user feedback and insights. And there's a bunch of stuff that it's never done. You constantly want to make changes to it to make it more effective.
How do you raise and spend 3-6 months kind of full-time seeking investment and also, continually focusing on growing and marketing and building the business? It just feels like it's 2 full-time jobs.
Frankly, it's a huge amount of work. I probably would do something differently than how I did do it in the business, which is I was really focused on product validation and making the product as effective as possible. And I think that I'm really proud of the work that we've done there, because it is really difficult, and we're doing something so much more complex and ambitious than, I don't know, setting up a really simple widget to support businesses to book calendar appointments more effectively. We're covering how do people change up their mode of transportation, diet, energy systems, the food that they purchase, waste in their home. It's just such an ambitious and massive undertaking. So I'm proud of the work we achieved, but I think not having a really strong revenue loop from the outset built into the initiative has made it harder, because you do have to effectively work on the business and then take yourself out of it and trust that the team you have around you can kind of keep things moving along while you focus on investment. If you can get to a point where you're covering your own costs, I really think that that's the best possible scenario, because then if you are raising money, you're doing it not because you need money to stay alive. You're doing it because, well, we want to scale up and we want to start offering our app to these really large enterprise clients. And so we need account managers and we need some additional developers. That's a fantastic way to pitch to a venture investor, compared to, we validated some stuff, but we don't have any money. Can we have some money? I'd say definitely I would have shifted our focus to be a lot more on revenue initially. And I think probably coming from a nonprofit background and being so cause focused, I sort of didn't have a strong an interest in how we generate revenue initially. And I think the best thing you can do is really work very hard on the business model and validate that early, because if you have revenue coming in, it completely changes the whole scenario of what you're doing. You're in a much better position in terms of leverage with investors. And you also then have your own resources that you're generating to reinvest back into the initiative.
In this same kind of note that we're on at the moment, when you look back and reflect on this journey of building an app and kind of being in tech, is there anything else that you either wish you did differently at the beginning or wish that you knew before you started?
Hindsight bias is really seductive. I mean, there's so many things that I feel like I've done that were only obviously mistakes 12 months later. It really reminds me of Game of Thrones. How the guy in season 1, Sean Bean, he gets killed and he's sort of in Game of Thrones. And it's the whole thing of Game of Thrones initially was that the characters pay for the consequences of their actions. But it's sort of really there's a slow burn to that you actually seeing that occur. And I feel like it's sort of similar with startups. You just don't know what you don't know. You're going to make mistakes and that's okay. I feel like I'm very lucky because I've learned so much in doing this. I think the thing I would have liked to have known before I started is actually to back myself and my instincts more, because if you're making other people's mistakes, you're not going to learn as well as if you're making your own. So go with your own instincts you will fail faster and you'll learn more effectively if you say, well, I really thought this was the situation. I thought this is what was going to happen. And I executed these actions. And then the opposite happened, or it did work as I intended. Okay, well, I can start to build up a sense of trust in myself and my decision making. Or no, I need to recalibrate because my understanding of this situation was wrong. So you're building in your own feedback loop by testing things in the real world, but based on your best assumptions of what you think is going to occur. And I think that's really important for women founders, not to stereotype, but there is a tendency to have what's called like an external frame of reference. And I certainly have this, and it's still something I have to work on, is constantly seeking advice, consuming information, trying to learn. And I often just need to pause and kind of go, well, what do I think about this? And not take in all of the external info and just figure out what I think first and go from that place. That's something I wish I'd known earlier. It would have saved me a lot of time.
Yeah, I feel like I fall into that trap a bit.
It's really common because, you don't want to be pig-headed and be like, I know everything and I'm just going to do it my way. And you don't want to be that person. But I think for most women, it's a safe bet that they're undervaluing their own decision-making skills.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thanks for sharing that. I love that. Thank you. At the end of every episode, we ask a series of 6 quick questions, some of which we might have covered, some of which we might not have, but I ask them all the same. So question number 1 is, what's your why? Why are you doing this every day?
I really care about the world. I don't want there to be a needless amount of human suffering or, for the planet to sort of burn. I find I'm pretty emotionally connected to the potential impacts of climate change. And so it's been a pretty consistent driver of my behavior for a long time. Yeah, I just really want to feel that I contributed to reducing some of the worst potential impacts of this crisis.
Question number 2 is, what's been your favorite marketing moment so far?
Look, probably 2 for different reasons. One was when we got featured by Apple, because that was just a really, really nice recognition for what we'd built and its quality with such a tiny team. Shout out to Remy and Lois, Mark and Tessa, by the way, who've been involved in the business and helped make it what it is. Yeah, so that was really nice. That happened super early on and we got a big boost in numbers. But just to have such a huge company with so many apps out there, for them to sort of single us out and say these guys are good value, was really gratifying. And then another marketing moment, which was for a totally different reason, was I got photographed for Vogue for their they had this Vogue Codes Female Future Innovators thing, and I was one of the finalists. And I just never been in a photo shoot before, and it was really weird. But I enjoyed it for the novelty. They had me dressed like Hillary Clinton in this powder blue suit, that was 4 sizes too big, looking at the camera with a fan wind, and that's just fun for the spectacle of it in hindsight.
I love that for you. Congrats.
Thanks.
Question number 3 is, what's your go-to business resource when it comes to a book or a podcast or a newsletter, something that you're consuming?
I've said this on a few podcasts, so it's the same answer as before, which is the book Principles by Ray Dalio. So that's just this gigantic book about how to make better decisions in business. I think it's really good, and that's what I'd recommend.
Yep. A classic. Add it to your reading list. Question number 4 is, how do you win the day? What are your AM and PM rituals that keep you feeling happy and successful and motivated?
Lower expectations in terms of winning the day, the fact that life's a journey and there's going to be days where I'm really productive and other days where I'm less productive. I'm not a machine, I'm a human being. And so is everybody listening. You're a human being, so you're going to have ups and downs. And having some self-compassion around that and some gentleness actually really helped me to perform better counterintuitively. I tended to be a bit of a slave driver in the past with my kind of task list and really pushing myself to do a lot every day. And now if I'm tired, I rest, I take breaks, sort of check in on my energy. That means that I can actually maintain a pretty good pace and my output's solid, but I'm also not stressed and exhausted. So take the pressure off and be kinder and think about how you talk to a friend. That's a bit of a heuristic.
Absolutely. I feel like we're all in this race, but it's just with ourselves. And when you catch yourself, getting into the fluster and the craziness of it all, you realize hang on, it's just me that I'm trying to push against myself, and you need to take yourself away from that.
Yeah, for sure. And also something that helped me with tricking my own mind was like rest is really crucial for productivity. You know, that you need to take time off. You need to have solid leisure time where you're away from thinking about your business. It actually improves the speed at which you can execute. So it's a necessary part of high performance.
Love that. Very good. Question number 5 is, what has been your worst money mistake and how much did it cost you?
There's one, but I won't talk about it. I don't want to poo on anyone publicly. Sorry for that phrasing. Honestly, hiring or bringing people in to do work that I felt like I couldn't do, but in hindsight, maybe it would have been better if I just kind of struggled along for a bit longer. Like, I think my view on recruitment now, whether you're dealing with contractors or employees, you want to hire someone at the point where you're like, I literally can't do this piece of work anymore. There's no space, or I'm just terrible at it. But I think going through that kind of learning curve, especially when you're an entrepreneur, like there are just really big costs associated with having payroll, having headcount. And you also then have a responsibility to your staff, you know, that you're providing them gainful employment, you want to give them job security. And it's a really big outgoing cost of a business, especially a business like mine with so little overheads, is the staff costs. So just being really, really thoughtful about hiring, and only hiring when it's absolutely critically necessary. And then you try and get by as much as you can prior to that without bringing anybody in. Because typically you can find automations, workarounds. You know, you'll have a learning curve where you get faster at things over time. It forces you to ruthlessly prioritize, and it keeps your burn rate low. So, you know, don't do the company building, mission building pieces where you're adding headcount unless you can cover all of those costs and you know that you're going to be able to cover them into the future.
And I feel like you can get sucked into this trap of, you know, the glamorous side of having a really big business and lots of people and all happening, but actually it can really be a downfall.
And it's so common, you know, companies that are much bigger than mine, you know, they have a bit of a boost in revenue. They get excited and they go, okay, we've got to grow the business with staff so that they can grow the business more. And then they end up hiring beyond their means because they think they're going to make it up with an increase in revenue that they haven't validated. Something like the economic conditions shift, suddenly they have to lay off 20 people. So, you know, that's such a common experience with startups. And I think it's easy to make that mistake of going, well, I need these people because it's going to help us grow. And it's like, great, but how do you, from a defensive standpoint, make sure that their salary is going to be covered and you've actually validated that already? I think that especially in the current economy, that's a more sensible way to go about hiring.
And question number 6, last question. What is just a crazy story, good or bad, that you've had from this journey in building a business?
I don't want to complain about the sexism stuff because I've been really lucky and I have a huge number of really fantastic men supporting me. Like most of my investors are men. Most of my mentors have been men. They've all been wonderful. But every now and then I have a conversation with someone that is just like sort of ridiculous, like telling me the most basic stuff, what a mobile app is and that app and how app retention works. I'm like, you know, I'm the CEO of a mobile app company. And so just stuff like that where it really boggles your brain when it's just 2 people in a room and you're like, I can't believe this person is telling me this. They think they're being helpful, but actually it's just that unconscious bias where, so stuff like that I think has been infuriating and funny. And again, one of the nicest things about running my own business is you do have more autonomy in terms of who you work with. Yeah. The Steve mansplainer in the office, you're like, well, I don't have to work with Steve necessarily. You know, you have more choice around that. And shout out to the Steves, like often it's not deliberate and they probably just need someone to gently take them aside. But
classic mansplaining. Hate it. Absolutely hate it.
For me, it's been the exception, not the rule. Most people that I've encountered have not behaved that way. But yeah, it definitely sticks out as outrageous when it's that egregious. Yeah.
Absolutely. Lily, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share your journey with One Small Step. I'm such a cheerleader and I'm excited to see where you go with this.
Thank you so much. It was really nice chatting.